My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 38 years old now. And if you'd asked me 10 years ago what betrayal looked like, I probably would have said cheating, lying, maybe stealing. I would have been wrong. Because betrayal can look a whole lot like your own mother smiling across the dinner table while asking if you'll be paying next month's rent for an apartment that's legally yours. Funny thing is, I didn't even realize how insane that sounded until years later. Back then, it had become normal. I honestly believed that's just how families worked. Looking back now, I can pinpoint the exact moment everything started. I was 27, standing in a lawyer's office in Columbus, Ohio. Rain hammered against the windows, while an elderly attorney pushed a folder across the desk. He adjusted his glasses. "Daniel, I'm sorry for your loss. My Aunt Margaret thought very highly of you." I swallowed. Aunt Margaret had never married. No kids. She lived quietly, worked as a librarian for nearly 40 years. Most people barely noticed her. I did. Every Sunday after church, I'd drive over with groceries, fix whatever around the apartment needed fixing, change light bulbs, carry laundry downstairs. Nothing heroic, just helping. She always called me her favorite visitor, not nephew. Visitor. Said visitors chose to come. Family sometimes didn't. Turns out, she remembered. The attorney opened the folder. "She left you her condominium." I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "The apartment on Maple Street." My brain stopped working. That place? It wasn't fancy. 2 bedrooms, brick building from the 70s, nothing luxurious. But it was fully paid off. No mortgage, no debt. Market value? Just under $300,000. For someone making $58,000 as an HVAC technician, it might as well have been Beverly Hills. I kept staring at the paperwork. There had to be some mistake. "There isn't," the attorney smiled. She was very specific. I signed everything with shaky hands. Driving home, I must have pulled over 4 different times because I couldn't stop smiling. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't going to rent anymore. No landlord, no lease renewals, no surprise increases. Just home. Or at least, that's what I thought. My parents insisted I move back temporarily while the legal paperwork finalized. "Save your money," Dad said. 6 months won't hurt." It sounded reasonable. Mom even made my favorite meatloaf that night. She hugged me, said she was proud. Looking back, that should have made me suspicious, because compliments were rare in our house. Growing up, there were really only 2 children, my older sister, Melissa, and the backup child, me. Melissa was brilliant. Straight-A student, cheer captain, student council president. Every family gathering turned into another celebration of whatever she'd accomplished that week. Daniel fixed Grandpa's fence. Nice. Melissa got Employee of the Month. Let's throw a barbecue. I got used to it. Eventually, you stop expecting applause. You just keep doing the work. Melissa graduated nursing school. My parents helped buy her first house. Down payment, furniture, even paid closing costs. When I graduated trade school, Dad handed me a toolbox he'd bought at a garage sale. It's still got a few good years left. That was the gift. I thanked him anyway. That's who I was back then. Always grateful. Even for leftovers. 6 months after Aunt Margaret passed away, the condo officially became mine. The deed carried my name. Only mine. I remember holding the paperwork in both hands before sliding it into a folder. I couldn't stop smiling. I drove straight to my parents' house. I got it! Mom hugged me. Dad shook my hand. Melissa happened to be visiting. She looked around. "So, when are you moving?" Dad answered before I could. "We've been talking." I frowned. "We?" He leaned back in his chair. "Your mother and I think it makes more sense if we move into the condo." I laughed. thought he was joking. Nobody else laughed. Silence filled the kitchen. Mom folded her hands. The house is getting harder for us to maintain. Dad nodded. You don't need all that space. I stared. But it's my home. Mom smiled patiently. And we're family. There it was, that word. Family. It always appeared right before someone wanted something. Dad continued. You can stay there too. It'll benefit everybody. I should have said no. God, I wish I had. Instead, I convinced myself they were getting older. Dad's knees bothered him. Mom hated climbing stairs. Maybe this really was temporary. Maybe we'd figure something out. 3 weeks later, they moved in. Not visited. Moved. New furniture, new television. Dad converted the second bedroom into his office. Mom redecorated the kitchen without asking. Family photos replaced Aunt Margaret's paintings. Little by little, the place stopped feeling like mine. One evening, I came home from work. My bedroom door was open. Melissa stood inside. She looked over. Oh, didn't know you'd be back already. My dresser drawers were open. My room? I asked. She shrugged. I needed somewhere to fold laundry. I stood there, speechless. She acted like I'd interrupted her. That should have been enough. It wasn't, because I still believed good sons didn't complain. 3 months later, Dad knocked on my bedroom door. He carried a yellow legal pad. We've been looking over expenses. I looked up from my laptop. What expenses? Utilities, groceries, property taxes. I nodded. Okay. He cleared his throat. Rent. I actually laughed, then stopped, because his face never changed. Rent? You want me to... He interrupted. You live here. You should help. I stared at him. This is my condo. Dad crossed his arms. We're retired. You have a job. Mom appeared behind him. We're not asking for much. $300. Every month. Something inside me whispered, this isn't right. But another voice, the one I'd listened to my whole life, said, don't be difficult. So I paid, month after month. Every first Friday, I'd transfer $300 into Dad's account, sometimes more. If the water heater broke, I paid. If the HOA raised fees, I paid. If Mom wanted new curtains, guess who bought them? Me. Funny thing is, not once, not one single time did they ever say thank you. Instead, Dad would nod and say, good, you're finally learning responsibility. Responsibility for paying rent on property I legally owned. If you'd told me then that it would only get worse, I probably wouldn't have believed you, because the craziest part hadn't happened yet. It started the day I met Emily, and that's when my parents realized they were about to lose something they thought would belong to them forever. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, but I never actually slept. I kept hearing my father's words in my head. Pay rent or move out. Funny thing is, I wasn't trying to figure out how to pay them. I was trying to understand why they believed they could threaten me inside a home that legally belonged to me. I walked into the kitchen around 6. My mother was making coffee like nothing had happened. She didn't even look surprised to see me. You'll need to leave the rent check on the counter before Friday, she said while stirring cream into her mug. Just like that, like we were discussing groceries. I poured myself a cup and stayed quiet. Sometimes silence tells people a lot more than arguments ever could. Dad came downstairs a few minutes later wearing his usual business clothes. He opened the newspaper. So, he said, you thinking about what we talked about? I am. He nodded. Good. I've actually been doing a lot of thinking. He smiled. I figured you would. Neither of them realized that while they slept peacefully the night before, I'd spent nearly 4 hours reading every document connected to that apartment. The deed, the mortgage release, the property tax records, everything. And every single page confirmed exactly what my attorney had told me years earlier. The apartment wasn't jointly owned. It wasn't held in trust. It wasn't promised to me someday. It belonged to me. Completely. No hidden clauses, no surprises, no loopholes. Which made my father's confidence even stranger. Unless there was something he thought I didn't know. That possibility bothered me all morning. Instead of going to work, I drove straight downtown to meet the attorney who handled my grandmother's estate, Robert Jenkins, 73 years old, gray eyebrows that looked permanently angry, but underneath that face was probably the sharpest real estate lawyer in Ohio. When I walked into his office, he smiled. "Emily, haven't seen you in years. I wish this was a social visit." He motioned toward the chair. "What's going on?" I explained everything. The rent, the threats, the demand that I either start paying or move out. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he slowly removed his glasses. Then he laughed. Not a polite laugh, a genuine one. "I'm sorry," he said, "I shouldn't laugh, but that's one of the dumbest things I've heard this year." "So I'm not crazy?" "No, you own that apartment. They're your tenants. Legally speaking," he leaned back, "they're the ones living at your permission." That sentence hit differently. I'd spent years believing I was lucky they let me stay. In reality, they were lucky I never questioned the arrangement. Robert opened my file cabinet. He pulled out the original inheritance documents. "There," he pointed, "your grandmother specifically requested the property transferred directly into your name. No life estate, no parental control, no management rights, nothing. She knew exactly what she was doing." I stared at my grandmother's signature. Suddenly, I remembered something. About 6 months before she passed away, she took me out for lunch. We were eating pie at this tiny diner outside Columbus. She grabbed my hand. "Promise me something." "What?" "When people tell you you don't deserve something, read the paperwork." I'd laughed back then, thought she was making one of her strange jokes. Now, it wasn't funny anymore. Robert looked at me carefully. "I have a question." "Shoot." "Have your parents ever paid you rent?" I blinked. "No." "They've been living there rent-free?" "As far as I know." "Interesting." He folded his hands. "Emily, you may have a much bigger problem than unpaid rent." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "They've occupied your property for years. They've represented themselves as owners. They've collected tax deductions connected to that address. They've likely claimed homeowner benefits." He paused. "If that's true, the IRS would probably find that very interesting." My stomach tightened. This wasn't just about family anymore. This was becoming legal, real legal. "I don't want to ruin their lives." Robert smiled sadly. "I've practiced law 45 years. People almost never ruin their own lives overnight. They usually spend years building the disaster. They just don't notice until somebody opens the file." I drove home feeling like I'd stepped into another universe. Nothing around me looked different. Same roads, same traffic, same apartment building. But everything had changed. For the first time, I understood the balance of power. That evening, I decided not to argue. Not yet. Instead, I played along. Dad sat watching baseball after dinner. "So," he asked, "you going to pay?" I nodded. "I've made a decision." His shoulders relaxed. "Good. I'll handle everything Friday." He smiled proudly. "I knew you'd come around." I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Friday arrived faster than I expected. At exactly 9 a.m., I walked into my attorney's office. By 9:45, the first certified letter was already mailed out.
Not to me, to my parents. At noon, another envelope went out, then another. Every document perfectly legal, every notice professionally prepared. No threats, no revenge, just paperwork, the kind Grandma always told me to read. That afternoon, I went back to work pretending everything was normal. Around 4 o'clock, my phone exploded. Dad, ignored. Mom, ignored. Dad again. 5 missed calls, 7 texts. Finally, 1 voicemail. Emily, call us immediately. His voice sounded completely different. Gone was the confidence. Gone was the authority. For the first time in my life, he sounded scared. When I got home, both of them were waiting inside the apartment. The certified envelopes sat opened across the dining table. Dad's face was bright red. "What the hell is this?" I looked down. "Oh, you got the letters." Mom stood up. "You hired a lawyer?" "I talked to one." Dad slammed the table. "You filed legal notices against your own parents?" "I responded to yours." His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Then he grabbed one document. "This says we're—" He stopped reading. "This says we're unauthorized occupants." "That's the legal term. We're your parents." "I know. You can't evict family." "I didn't write the law." Silence. Heavy silence. Finally, Dad whispered, "This isn't how family treats each other." Funny. That's exactly what I wanted to say when he demanded rent from the woman who legally owned the place. I looked around the apartment, the same apartment I'd cleaned, painted, maintained, paid taxes on through escrow without ever realizing it. Then I quietly said, "No, this isn't." He stared at me, waiting, expecting me to break. Instead, I walked toward the window, looked out over the city, and realized something that would change the rest of my life. For years, I'd mistaken permission for love, and those are 2 very different things.
6 weeks later, the court hearing lasted less than 20 minutes. The judge reviewed every document, every deed, every tax record, and every legal notice. When he looked up, he asked my parents one simple question. "Do either of you have legal ownership of this property?" Neither of them answered, because they couldn't. The judge ruled exactly as the paperwork showed. I was the sole legal owner. My parents were ordered to vacate the apartment within 30 days. Walking out of the courthouse, my father looked 20 years older. My mother cried quietly, but for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. I wasn't throwing them onto the street. I even offered to help them find a smaller apartment and paid their first month's rent. My father refused. His pride wouldn't let him accept help from the daughter he had spent years treating like she was worth less than her brother. 3 months later, they moved into a modest condo outside the city. Life slowly settled down. For me, the apartment finally felt like home instead of someone else's house. I remodeled the kitchen, painted the walls the colors my grandmother always loved, and framed one photo of us together above the fireplace. Every time I walked past it, I remembered what she once told me. Never let anyone convince you that what belongs to you must be earned twice. About a year later, my father called, not to ask for money, not to argue, just to apologize. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't dramatic. He simply said, "I should have treated you better." For him, those 5 words were the hardest he'd ever spoken. Our relationship never became perfect, but it became honest. Sometimes that's enough. Looking back now, people often ask if the apartment was the biggest inheritance my grandmother left me. It wasn't. The apartment was just bricks and concrete. The real inheritance was the lesson she left hidden inside those legal papers. Know your worth. Read what you sign. and never confuse love with control. Because the day my parents demanded rent from the home I owned, they thought they were taking away my security. Instead, they accidentally gave me my independence, and that's something no one can ever evict me from. The end.